Happy Easter, everyone. Christ is risen. Alleluia. A question which got brought to my attention because of where Easter fell this year was, why aren't Easter and Passover always at the same time? This year they were, in a sort of lovely little historically accurate way, but they don't always fall on the same day. And there are several reasons for that. And in addition, right, why doesn't Easter in the West, right, Catholic Christians, Protestant Christians, always align with the date of Easter in Eastern Christianity, right? The Orthodox churches, for example. So we have three different feasts here. So the key here lies in, obviously, the liturgical calendar, one, the Hebrew calendar, and then two different Christian calendars on the other hand. So in the marking off of God's interaction with human history in time and space through a calendar, right, Israel sort of sets this precedent. And it adopted the calendar that was in common usage in the ancient Near East, which is to say a Luni-Solar calendar. So a calendar that isn't just solar calendar, which is what we're familiar with. And now on the Jewish calendar, the Hebrew calendar, you can most readily tell this, if you have Jewish friends, by the fact that the days are marked off at sundown rather than sun up. So the Sabbath, for example, begins at sundown on Friday and ends at sundown on Saturday, right? You can see this from the Christian perspective, this reckoning of days, according to the Jewish tradition. You can see this with the Christian claim that, Christ rose on the third day. I don't know how many people stop to realize, if he was crucified on Friday and rose on the third day, Friday, Sunday, 3 days? How does that work? Well, it's because Jesus died before sundown on Friday. So that's day one, the day of the crucifixion. Day two is sundown on Friday to sundown on Saturday. And then day three, the third day, is sundown on Saturday to sundown on Sunday, right? We can see this tradition preserved a little bit from the Catholic perspective with, right, vigil masses that begin at 4:00 that celebrates the feast the next day, the Sunday the next day. Very early on in church history, very early on, in the first decades, we see it even written in the New Testament, St. Paul's missionary journeys. Christianity went from being a predominantly Jewish movement to a more Gentile movement. So as the church became more and more non-Jewish, it made more sense to tie the liturgical calendar that was emerging to the Roman calendar rather than to the Hebrew Jewish calendar. And the Roman calendar is solar, right? The most important thing that we remember, typically from the Council of Nicaea, the first ecumenical council of the church, is that council wrote the Nicene Creed that we say every Sunday. Well, one of the other issues that they tackled was how to calculate the date of Easter so that Christians could be celebrating at the same time, okay? So this is how, right, Passover gets divided from Easter in terms of its dates. The council decided that it was going to calculate Easter according to the first Sunday after the first full moon of the vernal equinox, the spring equinox. So the church decided to tie when Easter is celebrated to the movement of the sun and moon, right, to nature, rather than to anchor it still to the Hebrew calendar and celebrate Easter at the same time as Passover, even though that's sort of historically when the first Easter happened. Okay, that should have been the end of it. Well, what happened? Well, a couple of different things happened. During the Renaissance, the 16th century Renaissance in the West, there was a movement to refine the calendar, to make it more accurate. So, for example, this is when leap year is introduced. And so during that time period in the West, we adopted what we call the Gregorian calendar, because Pope Gregory XIII is the one who issued this movement in the West. Well, in the Christian East, they actually still retained the old Roman calendar, which is known as the Julian calendar after Julius Caesar. So there you get one distinction between when and where on the calendar festivals and feasts are celebrated in the Eastern world as opposed to the Western world. The big difference here, though, in addition to the calendar going from Gregorian to Julian, is that in the West, when we mark that date of the vernal equinox, the spring equinox, we mark it accurately. It always falls either on March 20th or the 21st, according to the Gregorian calendar. Well, in the East, they decided to fix the date of the vernal equinox to March 20th, according to the Julian calendar. So sometimes in the Eastern Christianity, the vernal equinox, right, the fixed vernal equinox actually doesn't happen on the actual vernal equinox, the actual spring equinox. So that throws the calculation for the dates of Easter off between the two traditions. And in addition, there's one other thing that throws it off, right? Occasionally, Easter will be celebrated on the same day, East and West, after calculations are made. But what never happens in the East is that Easter is never celebrated at the same time as Passover. We do in the West, and we just had that experience this most recent Easter. In the East, the theology that's being reinforced is that Christ is the fulfillment of God's covenant with Israel. But from my own perspective, my own Catholic perspective, not only do I like it very much when Easter and Passover fall on the same day because of the historical accuracy, right? That is when Christ's Passover happened. And it emphasizes that, like the lamb that was slain during the original Passover, Jesus Christ, our Paschal lamb, has been sacrificed, writes St. Paul. And just as God liberated Israel from the bondage of Egyptian servitude at the first Passover, in Jesus' Passover, he liberates us from the bondage of sin and death. And just as God freed Israel out of a great love for his people, so too did he send Christ to liberate us out of his great love for us. Thank you for listening to this little meditation on Passover and the Easters. And I do want to let you know that registration for summer classes at St. John's Seminary, MAM and MTS programs is now open. Please go to sjs.edu/register. You do not have to be enrolled in a degree program to take one class if that's all you wish to do. Thank you very much, and please pray for our seminary.